Have you ever worked on one of those projects where it seems like no matter what you do, you just screw something up? Yeah, that. This was one of those projects. I made a bunch of mistakes and I'll be going into detail about some of them. Anyways, I started this project really just because I wanted to use 7-segment displays for something. I think they look super awesome and I just kind of wanted to use them for something. So I guess I wasn't really reaching for the stars with this one even from the start. But what I came up with is this little, or I guess not so little, multi-tool, which has a hand counter that lets you choose how much you want to count at a time, a timer, and a thermistor for reading temperature. And I couldn't find any dedicated 7-segment display drivers, so I used two TLC 5940s instead. Probably a way too expensive solution to this problem, but it was the only thing I had laying around. So I had it all connected up on the breadboard, and when I was finished with the programming, it was time to tear it all down and start the soldering. So I gathered some strip board and all of the components, and I got to work. I did my best to keep things neat and tidy on the strip board, and to begin with, everything looked really good to be honest, but then I ran out of space, and I had to create this freak show on the backside, but I just had to accept the fact that it looked like absolute garbage and move on to the buttons and then the display. Now, when I was connecting the display to the main board, I realized that I had messed up, because I placed the first TLC to the right, but the first pin on the display was at the very left, and I had gotten way too far into the soldering when I realized this to just reprogram the Arduino. So that means that every single wire from the main board to the display is crossing over to the opposite side, when what I wanted was for all the leads to go side by side, kind of like a ribbon cable would. But already at this point I had realized that this wasn't going to be any kind of work of art anyways, so I just kind of continued with the project. So the circuit boards were all done and connected together, so now I just popped the ICs into their sockets, and it was time for a little test, which turned out to be successful. So I now moved on to the battery part of the project. These little lithium charging circuits from eBay seems to work very nice for projects like this. And I used a boost converter after the charging board to bump up the voltage to an even 5 volts that goes into the Arduino's voltage in pin and the positive leads of the displays, since I didn't want to ruin the 5 volt regulator on the Arduino. So I made sure that these old cells would charge properly, which they did, and I connected everything up to test if it would work, and again, a successful test. Okay, so next up was to take all of the measurements I needed to create the enclosure for this monstrosity, and of course my trusty old calipers died on me, so I had to dig up this Stone Age tool from my toolbox to get my measurements. And a little bit of modeling later, it was off to the printer. One thing that I was really happy with this project is how clean the 3D prints came out. I love how glossy the first layer gets when you print straight on glass beds. I began mounting everything into the enclosure, and sure enough, there was another mistake. I messed up one of my measurements, or I guess I messed up my math rather, because I made a little frame around where the displays would sit, but I made it too high. Because when I extruded that, as well as the pegs that holds the screws, I didn't take the thickness of the case itself into consideration. So the display is set 3mm into the case, instead of sitting flush with the surface of the case. But again, after all of these other mistakes, I didn't really want to reprint this entire part, so I just kinda got back to mounting and continued with the project. Eventually I got everything together and it turned out thick. I mean, I guess I could have made it a little thinner, but I didn't really have that much room to spare. At this point, if I could go back and change things now, I would have definitely made a better solution for the temperature probe, and obviously I would have made the entire thing thinner. But anyways, despite all the mistakes I made, it was a really fun build, and as I said at the start of the video, I really love how 7-segment displays look, and I still do.